The obsidian chamber felt like being trapped inside a giant's jewelry box, if that giant had particularly grim taste in decorations. Captain Marcus Kane shifted uncomfortably in his ceremonial armor, watching Queen Vexaria's 6 eyes track his every movement like targeting systems on a particularly judgmental battle cruiser. The territorial claims in the Kepler sector remain non-negotiable, the Queen announced, her voice carrying harmonics that made Marcus's teeth ache. Her elongated ears shimmered like liquid mercury in the chamber's bioluminescent lighting, and her silver skin seemed to absorb and reflect the ambient glow in patterns that probably meant something deeply insulting in Zephyrian. Marcus's fellow diplomat, Ambassador Chen, leaned forward with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed bureaucracy could solve millennia of interstellar hatred. Your Majesty, surely we can find a compromise that benefits both our peoples. The clicking sound that erupted from the Queen's crystalline advisors sounded like someone dropping a chandelier into a cement mixer. Marcus had learned enough Zephyrian over the years to know this roughly translated to "absolutely not, you soft-skinned fool." "Compromise," Queen Vexaria repeated, and somehow made the word sound like a personal insult to Marcus's entire genetic line. "Your species speaks of compromise, while your military vessels patrol systems that rightfully belong to the Zephyrian Empire." "To be fair," Marcus interjected, earning sharp looks from his own delegation, "your rightful claims seem to include about 60% of known space, including systems that were inhabited before your people invented faster-than-light travel." The Queen's eyes focused on him with laser intensity, cycling through colors that Marcus was fairly certain indicated either deep thought or preparation for immediate violence. "You speak boldly for a representative of a species that has existed for less time than our shortest historical epoch." "We may be young, but we're enthusiastic learners," Marcus replied. "We've gotten pretty good at annoying people across vast distances in a remarkably short time. It's practically our signature move." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees, and Marcus realized that Zephyrian humor apparently didn't translate well. Or at all. The Queen's advisors were making sounds like angry wind chimes, and Ambassador Chen was giving him the kind of look usually reserved for people who brought explosives to peace talks. "Your Majesty," Chen said quickly, "Captain Kane has extensive military experience and perhaps speaks more directly than diplomatic protocol typically allows." Military experience. The Queen's tone could have frozen plasma. "Yes, we are quite familiar with human military tactics, particularly their effectiveness at destroying things that took millennia to build." Marcus felt sweat gathering under his armor, which was designed more for ceremonial intimidation than actual climate control. The chamber's gravity generators were set slightly higher than Earth normal, and combined with the formal armor requirements, he felt like he was being slowly compressed into human jerky. "Your Majesty, if I may," he said, starting to unfasten the ceremonial chest plate. "This armor is designed for appearance rather than comfort, and I'm afraid I'm not at my most diplomatic when I feel like I'm being slowly cooked." "Captain Kane," Ambassador Chen hissed, "protocol clearly states." "Protocol clearly states a lot of things that assume we're not all going to die of heat exhaustion before we reach any agreements," Marcus interrupted, continuing to work on the armor clasps. "I'm sure the Queen understands the practical need for comfort during extended negotiations." The Queen watched with what might have been curiosity as Marcus struggled with the ceremonial buckles, which had clearly been designed by someone who assumed all humans had at least 12 fingers and unlimited patience. "Your customs require you to wear armor in the presence of royalty?" she asked, and Marcus detected what might have been genuine interest beneath the formal hostility. "Our customs require a lot of things that don't make much practical sense," Marcus admitted, finally freeing himself from the chest plate. "Like wearing uncomfortable clothes to show respect, or pretending that." He stopped mid-sentence as the armor fell away, revealing the jagged scar that ran from his collarbone to just above his heart. The mark was old now, faded to a silver-white line against his skin, but still clearly visible. The effect on Queen Vixaria was immediate and dramatic, all 6 of her eyes fixed on the scar with an intensity that made Marcus suddenly wish he'd kept the armor on. The bioluminescent walls of the chamber began pulsing in rapid, agitated patterns, responding to what Marcus was beginning to recognize as extreme emotional distress from their royal host. That's from Proxima VII, he said, suddenly self-conscious. Transport ship full of civilians took a direct hit from plasma artillery. I was stupid enough to try to carry wounded through the breach before they could patch it properly. The Queen rose from her throne so abruptly that her advisors scattered like startled insects, their crystalline shells ringing against each other in alarm. She moved toward Marcus with predatory grace, her tall frame casting shifting shadows in the chamber's strange light. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Chen ventured, clearly as confused as Marcus about the sudden change in atmosphere. The Queen stopped just outside Marcus's personal space, her 6 eyes studying the scar with an expression that Marcus couldn't begin to interpret. She raised one hand as if to touch the mark, then stopped, her fingers hovering just inches from his skin. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chamber's ambient humming. "You can't be." "Can't be what?" Marcus asked, genuinely concerned now that removing his armor might have violated some crucial cultural taboo. "Your Majesty, if I've offended." "The Chronicle," one of her advisors suddenly chittered, the translation matrix rendering his words in urgent, staccato bursts. "The pattern matches the Chronicle of the Ending Star." Queen Vixaria's skin shifted to patterns Marcus had never seen before, swirling designs that seemed to move with their own internal logic. Her ears, normally held in elegant curves, had flattened against her skull in what looked unmistakably like fear. "Impossible," she breathed, but her eyes never left the scar. "The texts are legend, myth, they cannot be." "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "I'm not sure what's happening here, but I get the distinct impression that my old battle wound means something significant to you." The Queen's laugh was sharp, brittle, like breaking crystal. "Significant? Yes, Captain Kane, one might say it is significant." She turned to her advisors, speaking rapidly in their native language, the sounds like wind through broken glass. Marcus caught enough to understand that they were discussing prophecy, destiny, and what sounded like either salvation or universal destruction. Neither option seemed particularly appealing. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Chen said, his diplomatic training finally catching up with the situation, "perhaps you could help us understand the cultural significance of Captain Kane's injury." Queen Vixaria turned back to Marcus, her expression cycling between fear, awe, and what might have been desperate hope. "Cultural significance," she repeated slowly. "Yes, Ambassador Chen, there is indeed cultural significance. According to the oldest texts of our people, the mark your captain bears is the sign of a warrior who will either save our civilizations or destroy them utterly." Marcus looked down at his scar, then back at the Queen. "Well, that's not ominous at all." The silence that followed the Queen's pronouncement was the kind of quiet that made Marcus wonder if the chamber's life support systems had suddenly decided to take a coffee break. Even Ambassador Chen, who Marcus had previously believed was physically incapable of being speechless, seemed to have temporarily forgotten how human vocal cords worked. "So," Marcus said finally, because someone had to break the tension and he'd apparently appointed himself the galaxy's least qualified person for the job. "On a scale of 1 to everyone dies horribly, how bad is this prophecy we're talking about?" Queen Vixaria's advisors erupted in a symphony of chittering that sounded like someone had dropped a toolbox full of wind chimes down a metal staircase. The translation matrix, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden influx of panicked Zephyrian, began spitting out fragments. "Ancient Doom, the Marked One, Statistical impossibility. Perhaps we should evacuate the planet. That last one is concerning, Marcus noted helpfully. The Queen raised her hand for silence, and the chittering stopped as abruptly as if someone had thrown a switch. She began pacing in front of Marcus, her movements creating rippling patterns of light across her silver skin that reminded him uncomfortably of a predator sizing up its prey. "The Chronicle of the Ending Star," she began, her voice taking on the formal cadence of someone reciting from memory, "speaks of a warrior from the third spiral who bears the mark of sacrifice upon his flesh. One who has tasted death but refused its embrace, who will stand between the starfire and the void." Third spiral, Marcus mused. That would be our local arm of the galaxy. And I did technically die for about 3 minutes on Proximo VII before the medics got my heart started again. So far this is uncomfortably accurate. Ambassador Chen found his voice. "Your Majesty, surely you don't seriously believe that an ancient prophecy—" "Accurate to the millimeter," one of the advisors interrupted, his crystalline form clicking as he projected a holographic display. The image showed Marcus's scar overlaid with what appeared to be text in ancient Zephyrian script. The match was perfect, down to the smallest detail. "Okay," Marcus said, studying the hologram. "That's either the most impressive coincidence in galactic history, or I'm about to have a very interesting day." "The prophecy continues," Queen Vexaria said, her 6 eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "It speaks of a choice that will either bind the scattered peoples in eternal peace or scatter their atoms to the cosmic winds." "Classic prophecy," Marcus observed. "Dramatic, vague, and absolutely no helpful guidance about which outcome is more likely. Do your ancient texts happen to mention anything useful, like maybe a user's manual or some troubleshooting tips?" The Queen's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement if it hadn't been mixed with obvious terror. "You make light of this, Captain Kane, but you should know that there have been others over the centuries. Warriors from various species who bore similar marks." "Let me guess," Marcus said with the sinking feeling of someone who just realized he'd walked into the worst possible punchline. "They all died under mysterious circumstances." "Indeed." The Queen stopped pacing and fixed him with a stare that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "My ancestors believed it was better to eliminate potential threats than to risk the prophecy's darker interpretation." "And you're telling me this why exactly?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. "Because, Captain Kane, I have spent my entire reign searching for the prophesied warrior. Part of me hoped never to find him, while another part desperately needed to know if the prophecy was real." Ambassador Chen stepped forward, his diplomatic instincts finally overriding his shock. "Your Majesty, surely you're not suggesting—" "I am suggesting nothing, Ambassador," the Queen replied sharply. "I am simply explaining why the sight of that scar has shaken me to my core. According to our oldest texts, the arrival of the marked warrior signals the end of the age of war between our peoples. The question is whether that end comes through peace or mutual annihilation." Marcus looked around the chamber, taking in the increasingly agitated bioluminescent patterns on the walls, the nervous chittering of the advisors, and the Queen's barely controlled emotional state. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that maybe, just maybe, the prophecy doesn't have to be interpreted as a death sentence for everyone involved." "Explain." The word came out like a challenge. "Well, for starters, I've been in plenty of situations where I was supposed to die horribly, and I've gotten remarkably good at disappointing people's expectations." Marcus gestured to his scar. "This particular near-death experience happened because I was trying to save people, not kill them. Maybe that's significant." The Queen's oldest advisor, whose crystalline form bore the scars of countless battles, clicked forward. "The Chronicle speaks of sacrifice, young warrior, of pain willingly accepted for the sake of others. Your wound, it was gained in service of those you sought to protect." 347 civilians, Marcus said quietly. mostly families being evacuated from a mining colony. The transport took a direct hit and started venting atmosphere. Someone had to get the wounded to the emergency pods before the hull gave way completely. And you chose to risk your life for beings who were not your kin, not your species, not your responsibility, the advisor continued, his tone thoughtful. They were people in trouble, Marcus said simply. That made them my responsibility. The Queen and her advisor exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes in the space of seconds. The bioluminescent patterns on the walls shifted to colors Marcus was beginning to associate with deep thought rather than panic. There is more to the prophecy, Queen Vexaria said slowly, as if she were making a decision that would reshape the galaxy. Parts that we have kept secret even from our own people, because the implications were too dangerous to share. More ominous prophecy, Marcus sighed, just what this conversation needed. The text speaks of a ritual, she continued, ignoring his comment. A binding that can only be performed between the marked warrior and the ruler of the ancient throne. It promises either permanent peace between our peoples or the destruction of both. Marcus felt the weight of destiny settling around him like a particularly heavy blanket made of pure cosmic irony. Let me guess. This ritual involves some kind of mystical connection between us, probably with ancient alien technology that nobody really understands anymore. The Queen's silence was answer enough, and if I refuse to participate, then we follow the path of my ancestors, she said quietly, and ensure that the prophecy can never be fulfilled. Marcus looked at Ambassador Chen, who appeared to be calculating the diplomatic ramifications of his colleague being either mystically bonded to an alien queen or murdered by her guards. Neither option seemed to be ranking high on the ambassador's list of preferred outcomes. Your Majesty, Marcus said finally, I have to ask, do you actually want to try this ritual, or are you just telling me about it as a courtesy before you have me vaporized? Queen Vexaria's 6 eyes studied him with an intensity that made Marcus feel like he was being examined at the molecular level. Captain Kane, she said slowly, for the first time in my life, I find myself hoping that an ancient prophecy might actually be true. The ceremonial procession to retrieve the sacred texts looked like something between a royal parade and a funeral march. Marcus found himself walking beside Queen Vexaria through corridors lined with guards whose crystalline armor caught and refracted light in patterns that probably spelled out either honored guest or walking dead man in Zephyrian military code. Your Majesty, he said, keeping his voice low enough that the accompanying advisors couldn't overhear, I have to ask, exactly how many people have you told about this prophecy situation? The full prophecy is known only to the Royal Council, she replied, her 6 eyes scanning the ancient murals that decorated the corridor walls. My people know of the chronicle, but the details of the ritual have been carefully guarded. Carefully guarded meaning classified at the level where knowledge of it gets you mysteriously disappeared. Something like that, yes. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I'm starting to understand why the previous candidates didn't survive the screening process. The Queen's step faltered slightly. Captain Kane, you should know that those deaths were not taken lightly. Each time, my predecessors hoped they had found someone who could fulfill the prophecy safely. Each time, the potential candidate either refused the ritual or attempted to use the knowledge for personal gain. And each time, they ended up as footnotes in your royal archives, Marcus observed. I'm beginning to see why you might be a little conflicted about this whole situation. They entered a vast circular chamber where the walls seemed to be made entirely of living crystal that pulsed with its own inner light. Ancient texts, carved directly into the crystalline surfaces, covered every available space in flowing script that hurt Marcus's eyes to look at directly. The Archive of Beginnings, Queen Vexaria announced. Every significant prophecy, treaty, and royal decree of our people is recorded here. Ambassador Chen, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the walk, finally found his voice. "Your Majesty, the historical significance of this chamber is extraordinary, but I feel compelled to point out that we're potentially discussing Captain Kane's life and death based on texts that are thousands of years old. Texts that have proven remarkably accurate in their predictions." The Queen's oldest advisor interjected, moving to a section of the wall where the crystal formations were so complex they looked like frozen lightning. "Observe." The crystalline surface began to glow, and suddenly Marcus was looking at what appeared to be a three-dimensional movie playing out in the heart of the living rock. The images showed a figure that was unmistakably human, bearing a scar identical to his own, standing in what looked like the very chamber they occupied. "That's either me, or someone who looks remarkably like me, had a very interesting conversation with your ancestors," Marcus said, trying to maintain his composure despite the fact that he was apparently starring in an ancient alien prophecy documentary. "The images show not what was, but what may be," the Queen explained. "The crystal matrices record probability cascades, potential futures that branch from significant decision points." "So this is basically a very elaborate cosmic flowchart," Marcus said, studying the holographic projection. "And I'm assuming the branches show both the everyone lives happily ever after option and the galactic catastrophe alternative." The advisor manipulated controls that seemed to be embedded directly in the crystal wall, and the image shifted to show two distinct paths branching from the central figure. One showed scenes of humans and Zephyrians working together, their ships flying in formation through star systems that Marcus didn't recognize. The other showed the same star systems as fields of debris and radiation. "Well, that's not subtle at all," Marcus observed. "Let me guess, the choice between these outcomes depends on this ritual you mentioned." "The binding of minds," Queen Vixaria said, her voice taking on the formal tone she'd used earlier. "It creates a permanent psychic link between the warrior and the ruler, making it impossible for either to act against the other's people without experiencing the pain directly." Marcus studied the crystalline projections, noting the way the peaceful timeline showed him and the Queen standing together, their hands clasped, while energy patterns flowed between them. "And the alternative timeline happens if the ritual fails," the advisor said grimly. "If the warrior's mind cannot withstand the connection, or if the ruler's consciousness is overwhelmed by the link, the psychic feedback destroys both participants and triggers a cascade effect that destabilizes the quantum field binding our local cluster of star systems." "Quantum field destabilization," Marcus repeated slowly. "That sounds like the kind of thing that would make entire solar systems very unhappy. It would effectively tear apart the fundamental forces holding matter together across several light-years of space." The Queen confirmed with the casual tone of someone discussing weather patterns. Ambassador Chen made a sound that might have been a whimper. "Your Majesty, surely there must be alternatives to risking the destruction of multiple star systems." "The prophecy is clear," the oldest advisor said, his crystalline form reflecting the chamber's light in complex patterns. "The marked warrior must choose, undergo the binding of minds, or watch as both our peoples destroy each other in wars that will continue until neither species remains." Marcus walked closer to the crystal wall, studying the projected timelines with the attention of someone whose life, and potentially everyone else's, depended on understanding the details. "These other candidates you mentioned," he said without turning around, "did any of them actually attempt the ritual?" The Queen's silence stretched long enough that Marcus turned to look at her directly. "One," she said finally. 3 centuries ago, a warrior from the Altarian Republic who bore a similar mark. The ritual did not proceed as expected. Let me guess. Massive psychic feedback, quantum destabilization, and very unhappy star systems. "A solar system that no longer exists," the advisor confirmed. "The Altarian Republic blamed us for the destruction. The war that followed lasted for 50 years and ended only when both civilizations had exhausted their military capacity. Marcus felt the weight of cosmic irony settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. So the previous attempt to prevent war actually caused a war. Indeed, it is why we have been cautious about subsequent candidates. Cautious meaning you killed them before they could potentially explode entire star systems, Marcus said, finally understanding the full scope of what he was dealing with. I have to say, Your Majesty, you people really know how to make a guy feel special. Queen Vexaria moved to stand beside him, studying the crystalline projections with an expression that mixed hope and terror in equal measure. Captain Kane, she said quietly, I need you to understand something. This choice is not just about you, or me, or even our two species. According to the prophecy, the success or failure of the binding of minds will determine whether this galaxy moves toward an age of cooperation or descends into chaos that will last for millennia. Marcus looked at the peaceful timeline, then at the catastrophic one, then at the queen whose 6 eyes held the accumulated wisdom and fear of centuries. Your Majesty, he said finally, I spent 3 minutes clinically dead on Proxima VII and came back to life because I was too stubborn to stay in the afterlife. I've survived 4 different wars, 6 assassination attempts, and a diplomatic dinner where the main course was still trying to escape from the plate. I've gotten very good at beating impossible odds. And she asked. Marcus grinned, and for the first time since entering the chamber, felt genuinely confident about their chances. And if there's one thing humans excel at, it's taking ancient prophecies that are supposed to end in disaster and finding the loophole that lets everyone go home happy. The Queen's expression shifted to something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Captain Kane, she said, I believe I am beginning to understand why the prophecy chose a human for this task. The ritual chamber existed in the deepest part of the Zephyrian palace, so far underground that Marcus suspected they were technically closer to the planet's core than to its surface. The walls were covered in technology that predated both human and Zephyrian civilizations, crystalline formations that hummed with energy patterns that made his teeth ache and his hair stand on end. You know, Marcus said, studying the ancient machinery that surrounded them. When I woke up this morning, undergo mystical bonding ritual with Alien Queen to prevent galactic catastrophe wasn't actually on my schedule. Queen Vexaria moved to the center of the chamber, where a raised platform of living crystal pulsed with soft blue light. Her 6 eyes reflected the glow, creating patterns that reminded Marcus of stars being born in distant nebulae. Second thoughts, Captain Kane? She asked, though her tone suggested she would understand if he decided to run screaming from the chamber. Oh, I'm terrified, Marcus admitted cheerfully. But I've learned that the things that scare me the most are usually the ones most worth doing. Besides, if we don't try this, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened. If we don't try this, the rest of your life may be considerably shorter than you expect. The Queen's oldest advisor pointed out helpfully from his position at what appeared to be a control console made of fossilized lightning. Thank you for that encouraging assessment, Marcus replied. Your bedside manner is truly inspiring. The Queen stepped onto the crystal platform, and immediately the chamber's ambient lighting shifted to deeper, more complex patterns. The ancient machinery responded to her presence, crystalline formations rotating and realigning themselves with mechanical precision that spoke of technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. The binding of minds requires complete mental openness from both participants, she explained as Marcus joined her on the platform. Any attempt to hide thoughts or emotions will cause the ritual to fail catastrophically. Complete mental openness, Marcus mused. So you're going to experience my memories of that time I accidentally declared war on the Centauri Tourism Board, my irrational fear of automated food dispensers, and my tendency to make inappropriate jokes during tense situations. And you will experience my memories of ordering the deaths of previous candidates, my nightmares about the destruction of entire star systems, and my secret fondness for human comedy broadcasts. The Queen replied with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as dry humor. You watch human comedy. Your species' ability to find humor in catastrophe is instructive. The ancient machinery reached some kind of crescendo, and Marcus felt the air itself beginning to vibrate with energy that made his scar tingle. The platform beneath their feet grew warm, and patterns of light began flowing through the crystal like luminescent blood through living veins. "Your Majesty," he said, suddenly serious as the weight of what they were about to attempt settled over him, "before we do this, I need you to know something. I've never been good at the mystical, destiny-fulfilling hero thing. I'm much better at the stumble through impossible situations and somehow survive approach." "Perhaps," she said, extending her hand toward his, "that is exactly what this situation requires." Their fingers touched, and the universe exploded into sensation. Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his own mind, flowing into the Queen's awareness like water finding its level. Her memories crashed into his with the force of stellar wind. Centuries of rule, the weight of decisions that affected billions, the loneliness of absolute power, and underneath it all, a desperate hope that peace might actually be possible. In return, she experienced his life through his eyes. The chaos of battle, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death, the guilt over every person he couldn't save, and the stubborn refusal to give up even when the odds were impossibly stacked against him. The connection deepened, and Marcus found himself experiencing the Queen's perspective on their first meeting. Through her senses, he felt her shock at seeing his scar, the way her ancient knowledge warred with her disbelief, and her growing realization that this irreverent human might actually be the key to saving both their peoples. "You were terrified," he said, though he wasn't sure if he spoke aloud or through their mental link. "I was terrified that you would be another failure," she replied, her mental voice carrying harmonics of emotion that no physical voice could convey, "and terrified that you might actually succeed." The ritual chamber's ancient machinery reached a new level of intensity, and Marcus felt the psychic bond between them solidifying into something permanent and unbreakable. The connection carried with it an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Any act of aggression between their peoples would be felt by both of them as physical pain, making war literally impossible to contemplate. But more than that, Marcus realized, the bond was creating something new. Through their shared consciousness, he could feel the Queen's genuine desire for peace, while she experienced his instinctive protectiveness toward anyone in need, regardless of species. "It's working," the oldest advisor said, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "The quantum resonance patterns are stabilizing. The probability cascades are shifting toward the peaceful timeline." Marcus felt the truth of those words through the bond. The future was reshaping itself around their connection, wars that might have lasted centuries dissolving into diplomatic solutions, trade agreements replacing military conflicts, and cooperation taking the place of suspicion. "There's something else," Queen Vixaria said through their link, and Marcus felt her surprise and wonder. "The bond is doing more than preventing war between our species. It's creating a template, a pattern that other species can follow." Through their shared consciousness, Marcus saw it. The psychic resonance of their bond spreading outward like ripples in a cosmic pond, offering other civilizations a path toward understanding that didn't require conquest or submission. "A galactic peace treaty written in consciousness itself," he mused, feeling the elegant simplicity of it. "Leave it to ancient alien technology to solve diplomacy by making empathy mandatory." The ritual reached its completion as the chamber's lighting shifted to warm, golden tones that spoke of success rather than catastrophe. Marcus felt the bond settle into place, becoming as natural as breathing, a constant awareness of the Queen's presence and well-being that would remain with him for the rest of his life. "How do you feel?" she asked, both aloud and through their link. "Like I've gained a very powerful and slightly terrifying sister," Marcus replied, surprised by how accurate the description felt. The bond carried none of the romantic overtones he'd half expected, but rather a deep, familial connection that transcended species. "Sister," the Queen repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I believe that describes it perfectly." They stepped down from the platform together, and Marcus noticed that the ancient machinery was powering down to a gentle, satisfied hum. The crisis had passed, the prophecy had been fulfilled, and somehow they'd managed to save the galaxy without exploding any star systems in the process. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Chen said, his diplomatic composure finally reasserting itself, "I believe we have much to discuss regarding the implementation of this new understanding between our peoples." "Indeed," Queen Vexaria agreed, though Marcus could sense through their bond that she was already looking forward to the challenges of building peace rather than managing war. "Though I suspect, Ambassador, that the real work is just beginning." Marcus grinned, feeling more optimistic about the future than he had in years. "Well, Your Majesty, if there's one thing humans and Zephyrians apparently have in common, it's that we're both too stubborn to let a little thing like impossibility stop us from doing what needs to be done." Through their bond, he felt her laughter, a sound like crystal bells in harmony with stellar wind. "Captain Kane," she said, "I believe this is the beginning of a very interesting alliance." As they left the ritual chamber together,